the Cybersecurity and Compliance Podcast with Craig Petronella. Learn about the most current IT security threats in ransomware, phishing, business email compromise, cybercrime tactics, cyber heist schemes, social engineering scams, as well as hints and tips from leading professionals to help you prevent hackers from penetrating your network and dropping ransomware or malware payloads. This podcast will arm you with the best info to defend your network against the latest cyber crimes. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And now, here's your host, Craig Petronella.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode here of the Cybersecurity Podcast with Craig Petronella and, of course, myself, Blake. Today, we have a very special guest. We have Sige Brody. Please introduce yourself, sir.
Hey, guys. Nice to meet you. Nice to be here. My name is Sige Brody. I was the Chief Technology Officer and co-founder of a managed cloud computing company called WebAir almost 20 years ago. We sold that to a private equity firm about 2.5 years ago, and that ended up merging with a bunch of other organizations, and that is now called Optinine. I am still the CTO over there in a part-time capacity, and I'm also out doing consulting services around product management and cybersecurity for other interesting technology companies.
Nice. Tell us about maybe some of your core values at Optinine, and then some of the other spaces and verticals that you work in.
Sure. So the primary value proposition of Optinine is really a managed cloud provider, and the services that Optinine provides surround management of public and private cloud infrastructure, and then also a large focus on business continuity, disaster recovery, and overall resilience. And so with that, we have services such as managed backups and managed disaster recovery. And the important thing to note is that we are focused on working with organizations who have sort of acknowledged that they don't have an appetite to take ownership and accountability of ensuring that their cloud infrastructure is properly managed and monitored and secured and scaled, that their disaster recovery infrastructure is set up properly. They outsource ownership of those layers to us, and we are the ones responsible to ask the right questions, ensure the runbooks are in place, ensure the right buttons are pressed, and so on and so forth. And so, as we look into the future and we see IT getting more complex, I think sort of outsourcing, sort of non-interesting or sort of transactional layers, managing infrastructure being one of them, is low-hanging fruit, and we see a lot of organizations sort of making that decision. The other organizations I'm involved with, I've done some investing in, technologies that I think are cool, and providing some consulting around there. So one company that I've been working with is called Aviation. They are focused on providing cybersecurity protection for physical aircraft. And I've been helping them sort of, get the word out. The aviation industry, surprisingly, is pretty far behind others that we're all familiar with as far as requirements around vendor diligence and proper security. So helping to educate and let people know what they need to do to protect their fleets.
What type of physical security does an aircraft require? I know that's a silly question, and obviously Craig and I work with computers and servers, so to me, whenever you say physical security with aircraft, it I don't know what it triggers. So I'm curious.
It's a really interesting sort of topic, especially for folks like us who have come from a traditional cybersecurity background. But so when you think about a physical aircraft, there's a few attack vectors. The possibly most alarming one and most obvious one is the radio frequency based communication. So you have planes and the ground and satellites sending RF type of signals, and these RF based messages are unencrypted and unauthenticated. And I think the unauthenticated piece is probably the more critical first, right? Because if you can transmit a message powerful enough to be received by an aircraft, the aircraft has an assumption of trust that it is accurate information, and so you can do a lot of nasty things. In fact, a few months ago, and so something like GPS jamming has been around for a bit. It's actually getting more sort of talk now because of the conflicts that are going on and the fact that it's actively being used by military. But more alarming is GPS spoofing, which, from our world, we go back maybe 15 years and talk about sort of just, TCP, or really just IP spoofing. Same thing, right? At some point, it was this holy grail. Is it possible? Oh, it's really difficult. Oh, we got it to work in some cases. And then it became very prevalent, right? And so we're going to see the same thing. In fact, a few months ago, there was a period of about 3 weeks where about over 20 commercial and business aircraft were the victims of GPS spoofing. And we're talking 787s, 777s, Airbuses, Gulfstreams, and they all thought they were about 80 nautical miles off from where they were supposed to be. One of them almost ended up in Iran by mistake. That would be bad. And super interesting is that a few years ago, somebody had this great idea to enhance the onboard inertial positioning systems to take GPS in as another factor to better ensure that positioning is correct. And that system's always designed to be standalone. And now, when this happened, the GPS data came in, the IRS, that system, got super confused, and it caused a cascading failure. All these other systems in the cockpit failed. And I'm talking about the planes that I just mentioned. And basically, these planes had to call air traffic control and say, where are we and where should we go? Which is surprising. So radio frequency is one. The other attack vectors really surround physical access to the aircraft and trust. And so if you think about the number of people that have access to these planes, all these subcontractors and vendors, again, there is an assumption of trust. If you have access to a device, lots of these devices have Ethernet ports, USB, PC, some of them are pretty old, PCM, CIA, all sorts of, different inputs. If you have access to those, then anything that you plug in there is assumed to be valid. You can override, replace the configs, all that. And when those types of attacks, you can modify the guidance systems, the navigational data, the autopilot, the actual control surfaces. Even in the cabin, people think, well, the cabin is separate. You get into a cabin management system, you can set off the fire alarm, the fire suppression system, the plumbing for the toilets. I mean, you can force a plane to not take off or force it to make an emergency landing. So that really comes down to supply chain, right? And vendor diligence and all that.
So there's all sorts of alarms going off in my brain. I'm thinking like pen tester for airplanes.
That's what this company does, is Civiation that I'm helping. They're doing vulnerability assessments for physical aircraft.
So would it be possible for a hacker to either board a plane or go into an airport where there's maybe a busy airport like Atlanta, for example, where there's a lot of aircraft kind of taxiing in, and use something like a Flipper Zero or some type of device like that to kind of either infiltrate or jam signals?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I don't know the output power of, I'm familiar with that device, but as far as the proximity requirement, I don't know. I mean, obviously those things are all possible, right? It's not a matter of, is it technically possible? It's more a matter of, how illegal it is, right? Same thing with, shining the lasers up on the planes, right? Like, obviously anybody could do that at any time. It's just lucky that it's not being done much.
So my fear,
the RF. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you. My fear is that there's some type of spy balloon that has RF jamming capability, or even drones that are flown with some type of jammer capability to, that all sorts of alarm bells going off for me.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Who has weaker Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Blake.
I was just curious. I'm a huge Airbus guy, so I'm on the Airbus train, and I've invested in Airbus. Like, obviously I hold stock in Airbus, and I have for, I don't know, years now. So I'm not a huge Boeing guy, but who has weaker security? Would you say Airbus or Boeing?
Oh man, yeah, you're taking me right to the hard questions. It's interesting. I don't know that I can answer that. Civiation works with both of them. And so what Civiation really does is they're doing like deep R&D around these avionics components. And some of these planes are fairly old, right? And so when they were put into production, assuming, physical access means assume trust, there was nothing wrong with that back then, I guess. But some of these vulnerabilities, like if I showed them to you on the platform, they would read like this, like the cabin management system, has a hard-coded IP of 10.0.0.5. It's open to default credentials, and if you plug into the Ethernet port, you can TFTP over and override the configurations and configs, right? Like the types of vulnerabilities are not crazy just because it happens to be on a plane. The unfortunate thing is if you're flying on a 30-year-old plane, like you're going to run into those types of things. Now, upgrading and updating those components can be very time consuming. They can't just do it, right? It could be 2 or 3 years to replace a component like that. And so a lot of this sort of mitigation for those types of things comes down to security awareness, training, and contextual awareness. You need to be aware of these exact vulnerabilities, which we know this fleet or this plane to be susceptible to, instead of, overwhelming them with just all the possibilities. Make it very contextual.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And we deal with, obviously we deal with a lot of computers and devices and personal devices, business devices. But my follow-up with that is, obviously these hackers, they have a motive, right? A lot of the motive that we see in our industry is financial. So from your perspective, what is the motive to, hacking a plane, for one, and what benefit does that do to a hacker, right? Like there's obviously got to be some motive, right?
So I did spend a little bit of time, I actually have a diagram around it of if I wanted to ransomware an aircraft, here's how I would do it. And obviously there is financial benefit there, right? And the amount of money lost when these planes are sitting on the ground is pretty high. Can you compare it to a hospital being ransomwared? It's probably close. Some of these planes, cost, $80 to $100 million. And, what does that look like when they're down for a week? And the operators, they have insurance. If an engine fails and needs to be replaced, what is that? What does the loss of business amount to for a week? Loss of business for an aircraft because of some sort of cyber attack is not something that any insurance company in the industry is going to cover at all right now. It is definitely in the gray area. And I've talked to some insurance carriers there, and they agree. But if I wanted to, ransomware a plane, think of it, you have these vendors who are coming on and off the planes and plugging in laptops to all these systems. Now, unfortunately, there is almost no vendor diligence in this industry. If I'm the owner of a fleet, and I'm entrusting a vendor or a partner to perform maintenance, or do updates or replace a failed component, there's no, hey, fill out the cybersecurity diligence form, show me how you enhance my security, not expose me to more. And so those laptops, are they running EDR? Are they going home and sitting on someone's home network? What does the cybersecurity posture back at the corporate office look like for these vendors? That's not happening. And so it wouldn't be fairly difficult to develop to take a traditional ransomware strain, right, that gets into a traditional IT organization through phishing, social means, whatever. And once it's in, what are they doing now? They're looking for critical assets, right? They're designed to look for SQL databases, whatever critical asset. Swap that critical asset to a avionics vulnerability. Now the ransomware is sitting on these laptops dormant, and it's just waiting to see the right signature on a local LAN. And when it does, it can ransomware that component. And so the leap from where we are to sort of a more sort of industry specific or use case specific strain, it's not that sort of crazy, right?
Have any drills been done like to simulate attacks like that?
No, unfortunately, like I said, the industry is pretty far off. I just spoke at a large business aviation conference a few weeks ago, talking about these things, and so that's what we're just at the point where we're educating as like, hey, these are the risks. This is what's possible, what's not. And I think similar to HIPAA and healthcare, it's going to take some top-down sort of pushing on, maybe warning, sort of threatening fines. So actually, in Europe. Actually, probably Blake, going back to maybe going back to your Airbus comment a little bit, but the Europeans do have a cybersecurity for aircraft regulation going live next year in 2025. And it's great. And if you look at it, it reads like what you guys would be used to. Proper monitoring for unauthorized access, proper securing of making sure they're running the latest firmware. Anything that you would see under normal sort of cyber requirements, they're requiring that on physical planes. And so that will help. The FAA traditionally is a little bit behind EASA on these, but it's coming. TSA has some requirements around it now, but they don't cover everybody. And the FAA actually also now just recently made an announcement that if you want FAA funding for airports, you need to include in your proposal how you plan on protecting the airport from a cybersecurity perspective. So it's starting, but it will take time. We just really need to be out there, advocating.
Sure.
I find it.
Sorry, Blake, real quick. So what about DoD or Department of Defense and military? Is it still education there, or is there any testing being done?
Oh, they're like in a completely different frame of mind. They are very advanced and they do a ton of stuff in this area. And they're not like, their RF communication is not like, what I'm talking about, right? So they have their own stuff. And from what I understand, they're aware of all these things and they're protecting themselves.
Okay. So it's kind of like the traditional trickle down effect, big companies, big militaries, and then it comes down the system, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, I think what's really ironic and interesting is if you think about commercial airlines, right? Some of the largest in the world, all the names that we know about, they spend millions of dollars a year on cybersecurity. They usually have their own SOCs, and they're paying threat intelligence companies, $500,000 or $750,000 for threat intel on their organizations to know what's going on. Very mature sort of internal, cyber teams. Yet, ironically, their most critical and prized assets, the aircrafts, they have no visibility into those at all, into what's going on whatsoever. And so part of what, Civiation is trying to do, and what I'm helping them with is, this is a bridge. The platform that they're developing, which is really it's a real-time, it's a vulnerability assessment, but it's also continuous. That can feed data into the SIM. It already has, MITRE ATT&CK framework, notifications. It can speak, sticks, taxi. I mean, we need to create a bridge between the existing cybersecurity apparatuses and these new threats. In fact, at Optinine, we did something similar. Optinine is in the business of, like I said, managing backups and disaster recovery. And part of that is we actually will deploy and manage backup and replication software at our customers, locations or on their servers, and we manage them. And we noticed that a lot of customers were coming to us to consume those services because obviously they were mindful of security and they wanted a capability to recover post attack. And then we realized that when attackers who are looking to ransomware an organization get into organizations and their IT infrastructure these days, they're actually, one of the first things they're doing is a very common pattern and workflow. One of the first things they're doing is they're looking for those backup and replication tools. They're seeking them out so that they can destroy any potential for recovery. And Blake, to your point, if that's what your economic benefit is, I want to get paid a ransom, I'm going to do everything in my power to improve the likelihood of getting paid. And so because we knew they were looking for these backup and replication tools, one of the things we did was we built this add-on to our offering where we would run the backup software configuration itself through machine learning on our side, and we would look for anomalies, we'd look for suspicious activity. If the end users maybe change their retention policy twice a month, made changes to encryption once a week, changed job definitions, and all of a sudden in one day we see a bunch of jobs deleted and other changes, that's suspicious. And because those things are happening before the ransomware takes place, it would be a predictor of a ransomware attack. And so we built that, we productized it, and we tied it into our service so that if and when we saw that, we can automatically air gap the offsite backups or DR, or we can, we built an API. We feed it into the client's SIM or their MSSP partner SIM. And again, I think you have, so it's a very sort of similar use case to the aircraft. You have this new attack vector that maybe it's been around for a long time, like backup servers, been around for a while. Airplanes been around for a while, but all of a sudden it's an attack vector that was not encompassed by the cyber team. Now it's being exploited, and we need to sort of build that bridge.
Yeah, I'm surprised, honestly, the FAA doesn't have regulations, behind this, like some type of compliance mandates that say, hey, for you to operate in our airspace, you have to go like we see it in, obviously data centers, endpoints, any type of
CMMC.
yeah. Any type of cyber infrastructure, we see these mandates already existing. But, the airline industry, I mean, it's a huge portion of our, economy, right? So travel, the airline industry, I mean, like I don't even know how much I mean, it's billions and billions of dollars, right? Of the sector that just goes unnoticed, uncared for. And I'm so surprised there's not mandates around that. And so for you, I'm curious, you said it's coming, right? You did say that. So what would those mandates look like for you? Like if you had a golden grail of mandates, what do you think they would include?
Well, so if you look at what EASA, which is the European FAA, essentially put out, it's exactly what you're saying. They are mandating operators, and this someone asked me this the other day. They said is it aircraft that are registered within Europe or that land within Europe? And I said, that's a really good question, and I don't know that there's an answer for that yet. But that has huge impact, right? Because now it's like you have every operator in the world, and every commercial operator needs to comply then at that point. And you're not just going to comply when you land; you need to comply your fleets fully. But the requirements that EASA is putting out, which is called the Part IS, and it goes live in October of 25. And I'll read them to you. And again, it reads very similar to what our traditional industries have been talking about for a while: maintaining the security of an aircraft system through their life cycle. Vulnerability management, identifying, assessing, and mitigating vulnerabilities in aircraft systems, security awareness training, protecting the integrity and availability of aircraft system. And that's a fun one, right? I used to have a lot of fun with that one with HIPAA, because HIPAA also spoke about availability of data, which when I was really focused on selling disaster recovery, we would use that. We'd say, hey, HIPAA is not only about people stealing your data, but if someone can cause your system to go down and make that patient data unavailable, that's a HIPAA violation. If you have downtime, and doctors can't get the patient data, that's a violation. So that's an interesting one. The other ones, back to EASA, are ensuring the confidentiality of aircraft data, monitoring aircraft systems for sign of unauthorized access or activity, aircraft incident response, implementing measures to mitigate risk. So again, like very sort of traditional, table stakes type of requirements. But the issue is, the word aircraft shows up in almost all of these, right? And so that's the rub. There's not many tools and systems that are out there designed for that.
I also see a web of jurisdictional conflicts, right? So let's just say, for example, an American airplane is flying within the borders of Europe, and something happens within the borders of Europe. Who has jurisdictional authority over that plane to investigate said breach? You know what I mean? Like it just it becomes this web of entanglement.
I'm also envisioning some type of flyby hostile country and some type of almost EMP, but specific for aircraft. Like a new cyber weapon aimed at aviation.
Yeah, I mean, so all of this stuff can happen, obviously in the air and in the sky. In fact, one of the RF systems that is susceptible to this is called ADSB, and it's basically just positioning data. And interesting thing is all the planes, actually, it's now mandated that the planes do this. So there's actually some pretty cool sites out there. Like if you go to ADSB Exchange, or Flight Tracker, which is a really cool app you can install on your phone. You might have those right now. They're awesome.
Yeah.
They have augmented reality. You can just point your phone at any plane you see flying past in the sky. It tells you the tail number. It tells you where it came from, where it's going. Really cool stuff. But if you look in the corner behind me, I have a little radio there. I'm participating in this ADSB Exchange. You go to the website, it shows you a global map of where every single plane is in the world right now. And that's all hobbyists like me that are sort of contributing to this network. It's like SETI, and it's cool. My little radio back here, I can receive signals within 300 miles. If I can look at just my map, it's
Wow.
actually,
It's pretty
if you're a
awesome.
geek and you like, it's a little Raspberry Pi with a $50 USB radio. It's a lot of fun. But anyway, the planes all put out these signals, right? And so that's cool. Here's where I am. One of the interesting things is that there's this collision avoidance system where the planes receive the signals from the other planes in the area, and the planes actually speak to each other, and they basically will say they form this consensus. It looks like we're gonna collide. I'll go up, you go down. I'll go left, you go right. And these messages are basically shown to the pilots, like, hey, your collision avoidance system is going off. We recommend that, we want to move to this position, or we want to do this, press the button. And so very easy to send a fake message and cause the plane to move or change position.
I'm really curious. So something that I know this is more kind of content focused, but obviously when the Super Bowl was happening and obviously Taylor Swift was flying across the ocean and people were tracking her flights, and then now you see there's this young guy, I can't think of his name, but I'm sure the young guy who's tracking celebrity jets and posting that
Wasn't he
information.
tracking Elon Musk at one
Yep,
point?
same one.
Yeah.
Same
Mhm.
Yep.
one.
Yeah, same kid. So something that nobody really talks about, and I'm curious to get your take on, is transparency of this information, right? Because they're using federal airspace, right? They're using federal tax dollars, obviously. And so there has to be some type of window for the public. Where do you define that, right?
Well, so that's what's actually happening, right? So if you go onto these sites, you can see all the planes and you can see their tail numbers, the FAA registered tail number. And if you go to the FAA's website, you can look up any tail number. It'll tell you what type of aircraft it is, give you some registration info, and give you ownership. And typically, what is done to sort of obfuscate the ownership in the I think the commercial operators, they don't care. It's like they just put it out there. But definitely in the business world side, an LLC, a new LLC is created per aircraft, and that's sort of like the paywall that you can't get behind. And so you don't necessarily know who the LLC. I mean, ironically enough, sometimes now you can go digging and you can look at the LLC and you look at the address. And it's fairly, like I saw one that, it's typically they'll put like the initials of the company. I mean, you don't need to, but that's the thing. If you can, once you get the name of the LLC, if you can figure out who owns that LLC or what it's related to, now you know whose plane it is. Now, what can they do? I'm sure there's a way to maybe, I don't know, maybe you can request to change your tail number, maybe you change the LLC. But once someone has that association, once you can get from tail number to kind of owner, the operators now mandated to put out these signals of here's where I am right now. Here's my tail and here's my position, and then it's trackable. I think, and that's the thing. That's an interesting thing. Like, it's like, people. I think the person who was tracking Taylor Swift, they sent him a cease and desist, right? And they sent him all this, like, we're going to sue you because you're putting her life at risk and all this other
Right.
stuff. But meanwhile, you're right. It's publicly available information. He's just bundling it up in a way that's easier for folks to see.
And I'm assuming you believe in that ability to do that, right? I mean,
I don't know. I haven't really thought about it much. I mean, on one hand, it's related to federal government and this and that and taxpayer dollars. On the other hand, it does make it easier, right, to conduct these attacks.
But I wonder if it needs to stay public.
Well, yeah, the tail number is, just a number, right? I think maybe the registration information, right?
That's what I
Maybe,
mean.
yeah, maybe not showing the owner, or maybe that has to be behind like a Freedom of Information Act request or something that makes it more difficult.
We're starting to see a lot of, we talk about like trustless, like zero trust frameworks a lot. And there seems to be kind of a divide of people that say, no, zero trust isn't the way, and people saying zero trust is the future. I'm curious. I could tell by your facial expression you have a few things to say.
Zero trust has been, it's turned into this overhyped marketing term. Look, 15, 20 years ago, in our offices in the Optinine, or at that point it was Web Air offices, we had a whole bunch of employees. We were a tech company, so it's not a fair example, but we wanted to secure our staff and our people and ensure that there was no data leakage. So every employee was put in their own VLAN. And when they VPN'd in, they ended up in that same employee VLAN. And so there was segmentation. They were not on a shared layer 2 network. And we were doing zero trust without having a fancy name for it.
Right.
And that's what bothers me. I think that, I worry that there are business owners that are out there who read the news, see these stories about ransomware, and basically in their head, they're like, well, I'm okay because I buy backups, or I have disaster recovery, or I pay the security company to take care of everything for me. And there's all these there's so many bad assumptions related to cloud and to security that people have a false sense of security and they just sort of discount it. And as you guys know, this is all multi-layered. There's no if I have X, then I'm secure. And I think we fall into that trap with zero trust. We subscribe to zero trust, therefore we're all set. We can ignore everything else. And that's what scares me, is the marketing aspect of it. There's a company that is focused on cybersecurity for the space vertical, for digital infrastructure in space. And so there's an AWS Snowball, which, if you don't know, is a glorified Raspberry Pi compute device.
Yeah.
It's an AWS edge compute device, but under the surface, it's pretty much a Raspberry Pi. Anyway, there's one of those on the space station. And so from a marketing perspective, it's like, whoa, we have edge compute in space. We can conduct computational, things in space. We have public cloud in space, Raspberry Pi. And that's cool. Like, you got to start somewhere. But then this other company came along and says, hey, we're doing zero trust in space. So from a marketing perspective, I think it's great. I would have done the same exact thing. But we got to be careful, So do I believe in zero trust principles? Yes. Is it the be all end all? No.
That's kind of funny to me. Obviously, we want to talk about the future, right? I know you don't have a crystal ball, but obviously you kind of seems like you have a pulse on where the future of cybersecurity is heading. Is there any type of exciting developments that you feel like that are happening now that may be game changing or groundbreaking in the future?
Well, I think I said at the beginning, but one of the things that also scares me is the fact that if you look at the role of IT managers, of CIOs, VP of infrastructure, whatever, the amount of sort of responsibility put on their plates year over year is increasing. And in many organizations, smaller, obviously, there's typically not a separate sort of security apparatus. They're then tasked with owning all the security stuff as well. And I think one of the things that a lot of those folks in those positions don't realize is part of their job is to manage complexity creep, is to have a focus on ensuring the most simplest architecture that they can find, which still satisfies the business needs and provides some level of flexibility. That should be one of their goals. But I don't think that they're really thinking that way. And so we end up with this SaaS sprawl that we're all aware of, right? We end up with cloud sprawl. We end up with, if you look at something like SASE, right? Another great marketing term, thank you, Gartner, is cool, but it's not one product. It's like 50 products. And so people need to really focus on simplifying their environment, because the more complex it is, obviously, the harder it's going to be to manage, monitor, secure, and scale it, right? And it becomes almost impossible. And so we need to take a very active approach on managing complexity. If that's not done, it will almost become impossible. And again, I think that also means the outlook is good for managed vendors. MSSPs, managed security vendors, managed cloud vendors, all that. And so I think we're going to see in the future outsourcing to best in breed becoming much more common, because as things get more complex, which they will, it's going to be almost impossible for internal teams to do it. And I think, by the way, I think it's low-hanging fruit, right? Like, I think, like, if you have a remediation list of 50, like, hey, I'm just going to give it to my vendor.
Yeah.
I do, have spent some time looking at what's happening with digital infrastructure in space. It's just an interest of mine. I think it's just super, super cool to geek out on. Space-based data centers, space-based edge compute, space-based connectivity. There's a company. Actually, there was a great launch yesterday. It was a SpaceX rideshare launch, the first of this year. And the rideshare launches are awesome because there's typically like 100. If I looked at my LinkedIn, there was like 30 different companies that, like, we're in space, we made it, because they're all in the same rideshare. But there's a company that's doing cell phone towers in space, right? Like, direct to device. Like, I'm on my normal iPhone, my normal Android, and I have cell phone access because I'm directly connected to a cell phone tower in space. I mean, how cool is that, right? And now you think about, well, where's the content? Well, why not just put it in space, in the space data center, which gets free power and free cooling? So is it going to happen tomorrow? No, but I think it's super fun to talk about. So that all needs to be secured. Now there's a lot of optical links. Like, now all the space-based connectivity is optical in nature. Like, Amazon Kuiper is already doing 100 gig satellite to satellite. SpaceX is doing satellite to satellite. And so now how do you secure that? So I don't know, like, to me now, like, going back to complexity, look at the increased complexity there, and, like, now apply your cybersecurity frameworks to that.
That brings up.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just sorry. I had a really quick follow up. It brings up a lot of thoughts to my mind, and now I haven't seen any, like, mandates or frameworks around satellite security.
Yeah. People are talking about, I mean, within the satellite industry, there's sort of like a subgroup. But again, going back to radio frequency communication, a lot of it has been, and I think that going back to your question about aviation and the lack of requirements, a lot of it's been security by obscurity, and the fact that these things were, from an engineering perspective, very difficult to do. But it's amazing to see how quickly it's gone from theory to active exploitation, in the wild. I'll give you another example that touches on space and security and even complexity. Is there's a company that's spun out of Google. I don't know how to pronounce their name. It's called, like, Alyara. But if you think, you guys are familiar with SD-WAN, right? This sort of capability of overlaying on top of multiple internet connections and all that. So what this company does is they created something called, like, temporal space software-defined networking. Like, they, made up a really cool acronym, and their focus is on taking terrestrial fiber connectivity, terrestrial 5G based connectivity, multiple satellite operator connections, and creating a mesh network that is, creating an overlaid mesh experience where, if satellites are blown out of the sky, if your network is cut, whatever, your connectivity can move from one part to the other with, no disruption at all. And to me, it's like super cool, right? It's something that we didn't even think we needed. But now, as these new options for connectivity become available, we're going to start using them. And then now we need a way to manage the complexity, right? And now, how do we ensure security? How do we ensure security assurances as we go from, platform to platform, right? So I think there's always new problems to solve as we force ourselves. It's almost like, self-fulfilling prophecy. New technology, we never knew we needed it, but now that we see it, we want to use it, and so we're going to use it. And now we just made our lives more complex, and now we have to secure the more complex reality.
Yeah. Well, we kind of went down the rabbit hole of space. We went down the rabbit hole of aviation. We talked briefly on cloud. Obviously, a part of you joining our podcast, obviously you're tapping into our audience, and our viewership and our listener base. Is there anything, we'd like to obviously give you the platform here. Is there anything that you feel like we didn't we didn't talk about that maybe you had on your mind?
Well, I mean, I would say just going back to the comment about assumptions, don't assume anything. A lot of people like to check the box around backups, disaster recovery. And again, I think the most important thing that an organization can ask themselves is, do we have an appetite to take ownership and accountability of managing X, Y, and Z, of being responsible that we've set up our AWS account the right way and that we've checked all the boxes? Do we want to be on the hook? Do we want to be on the hook to ensure that our disaster recovery configuration is working properly? Or would we rather just sign a contract for it and hold a vendor accountable to an SLA? And I think people don't realize, when you think about managed services, and I think you guys have similar services, is you're not buying bits and bytes or X amount of storage. You're buying performance. Like with Optinine, you're entering into a contract that we are going to ensure that your disaster recovery infrastructure is up and running with the specified RTO recovery time, and that your data is no longer than X amount old. And if we happen to be using the wrong hardware infrastructure on our side to get that job done, well, then it's on us to spend any amount of time or any investments to ensure that we upgrade so that we're meeting the performance requirements of the contract. And so I think the first question is, what do we want our IT folks managing infrastructure and security and cloud and backups and DR, or do we want them focused on adding value to the business? That is super important. And by the way, I've worked with many very large organizations who totally have the technical capabilities and the teams to do all that, but they've made the conscious decision of, we don't want to be on the hook for it. We'd rather have a contract and sue someone, if it gets to that, to be responsible for it. And so I would say that to everybody, think about that. And also think about the assumptions that you might be making of, we're good because. And then, talk to a vendor. Optinine is great at managed disaster recovery, backups, managing cloud, especially with what's going on with Broadcom and VMware right now. I don't know if you guys are following that.
Yeah.
It's a mess.
I know.
And it's going to cause a ton of consolidation. I mean, now is a really good time to, if you were like teetering, like, well, maybe should we keep running our own VMware? Should we keep running our own hardware? One of the cool things that Optinine does is we run managed VMware private clouds. And so we can move your existing VMware-based infrastructure and keep it on VMware. Our pricing is much better than what your renewals are coming in at. Integrate to your existing network and adhere to your existing security frameworks, and sort of the best of both worlds. So yeah, those are interesting things I think to put out there for Optinine. And then myself, I'm involved there. I'm also doing some consulting. So if there's anything I've mentioned that is interesting, feel free to hit me up. But as you can tell, I love to chat about these things.
Yeah. Tell our listeners how they can reach you, how they can communicate with you. What's the best means to make contact to you?
My personal website is 10forward.ai, number 10forward.ai, or find me out on LinkedIn.
Yeah, we'll find it, and we'll drop some links here in the description.
Awesome.
I think that's all that I had. Craig, any?
No, I think that was great. So one last question I had on the Optinine. Do you support like most of the modern regulations? I know you mentioned HIPAA compliance. Assuming that maybe you're achieving or headed towards CMMC compliance, or is there anything that you guys don't do, or that you like in a certain regulation or vertical?
Yeah, I mean, is there anything we don't do? Well, no, we do all of them. If it's FedRAMP, that's the only one that's a real fun one to talk about. But when we do FedRAMP, we like to partner with AWS GovCloud. Besides that caveat, we do all the rest. And what we do, and our strategy around compliance, is we've taken our SOC 2 audit and we've added all of the additional frameworks, and we add a section that shows how we demonstrate we demonstrate how we comply with all those. And we map them back to our SOC 2, and we also let the client know, hey, for this specific regulation, this one's on you. And so we are mapping to CMMC and to ITAR and CGIS and HIPAA and GDPR and like probably 50 more.
Just may keep
Awesome.
up with this. It's always so annoying for us, but I mean, we find some fun in it,
Yeah, I saw
exploring.
CMMC on your website, and I thought that's like a super interesting one where it went, where it's heading. And to me, what's going to happen in the aviation industry from a sort of subcontractor perspective, I think it's going to look very similar to what's going on with CMMC right now.
Yeah, CMMC is our bread and
Agreed.
butter. Craig and I are both CMMC certified. I'm an RP, Craig's an RP, and we're an RPO. So that's kind of our bread and butter
Nice.
for sure.
Awesome.
So, well, thanks for
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. We appreciate the opportunity to speak to you. And I'm sure we will definitely stay in touch, and we'll definitely see you probably likely in the future. We will follow up and make sure that we check in on you and our listeners as well. We'll ask you back for updates and yeah, looking forward to doing that with you.
Awesome, guys. Thank you for the time. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Cybersecurity and Compliance Podcast with Craig Petronella. For other episodes and more information, visit petronellatech.com. Also visit our other websites, compliancearmor.com and blockchainsecurity.com. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for listening, and stay secure.